I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. The rain lashed against the kitchen window as Michelle Young carefully added a pinch of thyme to the slow-cooking pot roast. At 69, her hands weren't as steady as they once were, but they still remembered the rhythm of cooking that had sustained her family through the hardest times. This should be perfect for Kevin's birthday, she murmured to herself, tasting the rich broth. Her 6-year-old grandson loved her pot roast above all other foods, a fact that seemed to irritate her daughter-in-law to no end. Michelle checked her watch and sighed. She needed to leave soon if she was going to make the 2-hour journey by city bus to her son's house. Since Harold passed away 5 years ago, Michelle's world had gradually contracted to the tiny 1-bedroom apartment she could barely afford on her Social Security checks. The apartment walls held the ghosts of a different life. Faded photographs of Harold in his prime, James as a chubby-cheeked toddler, and more recent ones of little Kevin. Each image a bookmark in the story of her life. She packed the still-hot pot roast into an insulated container, wrapped it carefully, and placed it in her oversized handbag along with a small, meticulously wrapped present, a hand-carved wooden train she'd found at a thrift store and spent weeks restoring. Her bones ached as she locked her apartment door. The first bus was already at the stop when she arrived, breathless from hurrying. "Morning, Mrs. Young." The driver nodded. He'd been driving this route for years and knew her routine. "Visiting the family today? It's my grandson's birthday," she smiled, feeding her senior transit card into the machine. "That's a mighty heavy bag for someone your age," he noted with concern. Michelle patted the bag protectively. "It's worth every ounce." 2 buses and nearly 2 hours later, Michelle finally stood before the imposing 2-story house her son and daughter-in-law had purchased 3 years ago. It was in one of those new developments where every house looked eerily similar. Grand facades with perfect landscaping that made Michelle's modest apartment seem even smaller by comparison. Before she could ring the doorbell, the door swung open. James stood there, 6 feet tall with Harold's eyes and her chin, dressed in an expensive-looking sweater. "Mom, why did you take the bus again? I told you we'd come pick you up." He frowned, then noticed the containers in her hands. "You brought more food? The fridge is already packed." Michelle managed a weak smile. "Kevin loves my pot roast, and I don't mind the bus. Gives me time to think." As she stepped inside, Patricia Young emerged from the kitchen, her slim figure wrapped in what Michelle recognized as one of those high-end athleisure outfits that cost more than Michelle's monthly grocery budget. Her lips curled into a tight line when she spotted the food containers. "Michelle, we're trying to follow a scientifically backed diet for Kevin. All that butter and salt in your cooking isn't good for his development." The words felt like tiny needles to Michelle's heart, but she kept the smile plastered on her face. "A little treat once in a while won't hurt." Just then, Kevin ran into the entryway, his dark hair a mess and his face lighting up when he saw her. "Grandma!" He flung himself at her legs with such force that Michelle nearly lost her balance. "There's my birthday boy," Michelle laughed, bending down with effort to hug him properly. Patricia immediately pulled Kevin away. "Wash your hands first, sweetie. You've been playing with your trucks." Her voice softened for her son in a way it never did for Michelle. To Michelle, she lowered her voice and added, "Mom, please don't always spoil him like this. We're trying to raise him with healthy boundaries." Michelle opened her mouth to respond but said nothing. This wasn't the first time. The clashes over parenting philosophies had grown more frequent over the past year. Patricia was all about modern, gentle parenting methods backed by the latest research, while Michelle thought a child needed some good old-fashioned home cooking and an extra sweater when it was cold. "Kevin's been having trouble focusing at his piano lessons," Patricia continued, as if Michelle hadn't noticed her silence. "His teacher thinks his diet might be affecting his concentration. He's only 6. Michelle finally said. Maybe he just needs to be a child a little longer. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. That kind of outdated thinking is exactly what we're trying to avoid. Children's brains are developing rapidly at this age. James cleared his throat. Let's save this discussion for later. Kevin's friends will be here soon for the party. Michelle nodded, grateful for the intervention. As she moved toward the kitchen to put away the food, she couldn't help but notice how out of place she felt in this sleek, modern house with its minimalist decor and absence of family photos. Even the refrigerator was a gleaming stainless steel monstrosity that didn't allow for the magnets and children's artwork that had once cluttered her own. Where should I put this? She asked, holding up the pot roast. Patricia sighed dramatically. Just leave it on the counter. We probably won't have time for it today with all the party food coming. Michelle silently placed the container on the counter, feeling the weight of rejection settling on her shoulders. She remembered the days when James was little, when a homemade meal was the greatest treasure she could provide during those lean years after Harold lost his factory job. For James's 6th birthday, all she could afford was to add a fried egg to his ramen noodles. He had eaten it with such joy, proclaiming it the best birthday dinner ever. How things had changed. The birthday dinner wasn't at home as Michelle had expected, but at an upscale downtown restaurant with a name she couldn't pronounce. She felt a knot in her stomach just looking at the prices on the menu. A single meal here cost more than her entire weekly budget. We'll have the children's tasting menu for Kevin, Patricia informed the waiter without consulting the menu. And a bottle of the Pinot Noir for the table. Michelle stared at the wine list. The bottle cost nearly as much as her monthly electric bill. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling underdressed in her best church dress, while the other diners wore outfits that screamed money and status. Kevin spent most of the meal glued to a tablet watching cartoons, while Patricia occasionally spoon-fed him a bite of the artfully arranged food that looked nothing like what a child would want to eat. James was distracted, constantly checking his phone for work emails. James tells me you're still volunteering at the community center, Patricia said, breaking the awkward silence. Michelle nodded. 3 days a week. I help with the after-school reading program. That's nice, Patricia replied with what seemed like genuine interest. Though I worry about you taking the bus all over town at your age. There it was, the subtle reminder of her age, her limitations, her place in their world. The bus is perfectly fine. I've been taking it for 40 years, Michelle said, more defensively than she intended. Patricia shared a look with James that Michelle couldn't quite interpret. We just worry about you, that's all. Michelle wanted to point out that they hadn't seemed worried enough to pick her up this morning, but she bit her tongue. Tonight was about Kevin. The waiter approached with the birthday cake, a tiny, sophisticated-looking creation with a single candle. Make a wish, sweetie, Patricia encouraged as they sang Happy Birthday. Kevin blew out the candle half-heartedly, more interested in returning to his tablet game than in the cake. Michelle's heart sank a little. When James was young, the simplest birthday celebrations had been filled with genuine excitement. On the way home, the rain started again. Michelle sat in the back with Kevin, who had fallen asleep beside her, his head lolling against the car seat. Soft classical music played through the speakers as James and Patricia murmured to each other in the front. Staring at the blurred city lights, Michelle found herself thinking about James's childhood. The humble birthday celebrations, the handmade gifts, the way his face would light up at the simplest pleasures. She'd worked so hard to give him everything she could, often going without herself. Mom, what are you thinking about? Patricia's voice pulled her back to the present. Just reminiscing, Michelle replied softly, stroking Kevin's hair. Look at how he's sleeping, Patricia said with a frown. It's because you've spoiled him. He can't fall asleep unless someone is right next to him now. That was the last straw. It's perfectly normal for a child to need a sense of security, Michelle snapped. When James was little, he Here we go again, Patricia's voice shot up. Can you please stop applying your outdated ideas to our lives? Times have changed, Michelle. Mom, James chimed in, his voice tight. Patricia studied child psychology. Just listen to her. A wave of indignation washed over Michelle. You were just what? Patricia twisted around in her seat, her eyes gleaming in the dim light of the car. You just think we don't know how to raise our own child. Is that it? Do you know what Kevin's piano teacher said? That he has trouble concentrating. It's because you're always feeding him that processed junk food. How is my cooking junk food? Michelle's voice began to tremble. When James was a kid, Shut up, James roared, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. The car swerved violently. It's always when James was a kid. Are you ever going to stop? Michelle was stunned into silence. In his entire life, James had never, not once, yelled at her like that. Tears welled up in her eyes. What are you crying for now? Patricia sneered. You resort to tears every time you can't win an argument. Who are you trying to look pathetic for? Just then, the shouting woke Kevin and he started to wail. See, now you've woken him up, Patricia hissed, turning to soothe the child. Michelle sat in frozen shock, unable to process what was happening. The James she knew, the sweet boy who had once brought her wildflowers just because, who had stayed by her bedside all night when she was sick with pneumonia, seemed to have vanished, replaced by this angry stranger. Without warning, James pulled the car over onto the emergency shoulder of the interstate. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof like angry fists. James turned around, his face contorted with anger. Before Michelle could even process what was happening, the back of his hand struck her face with a force that snapped her head to the side. Mom, can you just give it a rest? His face, illuminated by passing headlights, looked like a stranger's. You're always criticizing, always telling us what to do. We don't need you running our lives. Michelle clutched her cheek, too shocked to speak. Was this the son she had worked her fingers to the bone to raise? The same boy who would bring her an umbrella in the rain and stay by her bedside all night when she was sick? Get out, James said, his voice cold as ice. What? Michelle thought she had misheard him. I said get out. Go cool off, he ordered. He unbuckled his seatbelt, walked around to her side, and yanked the door open. Michelle stumbled out of the car, her legs shaking beneath her. Before she could find her footing, James threw her handbag out after her and slammed the door shut. Patricia rolled down her window to deliver her final heart-shattering blow. You better remember this, you old hag. Talk back again and you'll be sleeping in the trash. And then they drove away, leaving Michelle alone in the torrential downpour, soaked to the bone, her heart ripped to shreds. The rain fell harder, turning the world into a blur of headlights and darkness. Michelle stood frozen on the shoulder of the interstate, unable to process what had just happened. Her left cheek burned where James had struck her, and she could taste the metallic tang of blood in her mouth. This can't be happening, she whispered, her words immediately swallowed by the howling wind. 69 years old, abandoned on the side of a highway in a storm, by her own son. Michelle trudged along the shoulder, her steps heavy with the weight of betrayal. Her phone was in her purse, but she was afraid to use it. The last time she had called James to tell him he was working too many hours and needed to take care of himself, Patricia had accused her of interfering in their lives. Water droplets blurred her glasses, making it impossible to see clearly. Cars sped past, spraying her with dirty water. Not a single one stopped to ask if the drenched old woman needed help. How had the world become so cold? As she walked, fragments of memories flashed through her mind. James as a toddler, his small hand clutching hers as they crossed the street. James at 8, proudly showing her a drawing he'd made at school. James at 16, working part-time at the grocery store to help with bills after Harold's accident at the factory had left them struggling. What had happened to that boy? The rain seemed to be getting worse, if that was even possible. Michelle's arthritis was flaring up, making each step agony. Her soaked clothes clung to her body, leaching away what little warmth remained. After what felt like an eternity, she finally saw a sign for a rest stop. Her legs were screaming in protest, but she gritted her teeth and pushed forward. The lights of the service plaza were a warm beacon in the stormy night, her only glimmer of hope. Michelle must have been a terrifying sight when she pushed open the door to the convenience store. The young cashier gasped, "Oh my God, ma'am, what happened to you?" Michelle opened her mouth to speak, but a wave of dizziness washed over her. The fluorescent lights seemed to swirl and blur. She felt her knees buckle, and then everything went black. She awoke on a small cot covered with a dry blanket. Her wet clothes had been replaced with a set of clean sweats that were several sizes too large. A woman who looked to be in her 50s was sitting beside her. "You're awake," she said, smiling as she handed Michelle a cup of hot tea. "You gave us quite a scare. You passed out in the store with a high fever." Michelle struggled to sit up, her body aching all over. "Thank you. Where am I?" "You're at the highway rest stop. I'm Nancy, the night manager," she said, helping Michelle adjust her pillow. "We've called for an ambulance, but the rain is making the roads treacherous, so it might be a while." Michelle shook her head. "No, don't worry about it. I'm fine." She tried to get up, but Nancy gently pushed her back down. "Don't be stubborn. You were out in that storm for who knows how long. You need to get checked out." Nancy hesitated for a moment. "How did you end up walking on the highway by yourself in weather like this?" The tears started flowing again. For some reason, Michelle found herself telling this complete stranger everything. When she got to the part about James slapping her, Nancy gasped. When she told her they had left her on the highway, Nancy slammed her hand on the small table in anger. And when Michelle repeated Patricia's final words, Nancy's own eyes grew red with tears. "Bastards!" Nancy seethed. "I have a son. If he ever dared to treat me like that, I'd break both his legs." Michelle shook her head with a bitter smile. "It was my fault. I shouldn't always be meddling." "Bullshit," Nancy swore. "You're his mother. You have every right to say what you think. They use you when they need you, then kick you to the curb when they don't." Michelle fell silent. Nancy was right. After Kevin was born, she had gone from being a mother to being a nuisance. An old woman poisoning their precious son with outdated ideas. "Do you have anywhere to go?" Nancy asked suddenly. Michelle froze. "My keys were in my purse, but my purse must have fallen on the highway when James threw it out." "Go back to them?" Nancy asked, incredulous. Michelle shuddered, the image of Patricia's venomous glare flashing in her mind. "I thought so," Nancy sighed. "Look, how about this? When my shift is over, you can come stay with me for a few days, just until you figure things out." Michelle looked at her, heart filled with gratitude. "I couldn't possibly impose." "Don't be silly, we all get old," Nancy said, patting Michelle's hand. "My own mom passed away last year. Seeing you, it just reminds me of her." And just like that, instead of calling James or going back to face her son's anger, Michelle found herself agreeing to go with Nancy, a stranger who had shown her more kindness in 1 hour than her family had in years. The next morning, Nancy drove Michelle to her modest home on the outskirts of town. Michelle's fever had spiked to 103 degrees during the night, and Nancy took time off work to care for her. They stopped briefly at a pharmacy to pick up some basic medication and supplies. "The guest room isn't much," Nancy apologized as she showed Michelle around the small ranch-style house. "But it's clean and quiet." "It's perfect," Michelle said sincerely. After the events of the previous night, Any safe harbor felt like paradise. For 3 days, Michelle drifted in and out of fever dreams. Sometimes she thought she was back in her old house, with James as a little boy asking for a bedtime story. Other times, she relived the moment of being abandoned on the highway, the rain mixing with her tears. Nancy was there through it all, bringing cool cloths for her forehead, making sure she took her medicine, and urging her to drink homemade chicken soup. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Michelle sat on Nancy's small balcony, soaking in the sun. From there, she could see a small community park where elderly people were doing Tai Chi, walking their dogs, and playing with their grandchildren. It struck her then that her life had nothing in it besides James and his family. She had no real friends, no hobbies, no purpose beyond being a grandmother who wasn't even wanted. "Nancy," Michelle announced at dinner that night, "I've made up my mind. I'm going to live for myself for once." Nancy put a piece of grilled fish on her plate. "What do you mean?" "I'm 69 years old. I don't have many years left," Michelle said, putting down her fork. "All these years, every penny I saved went to James. I barely touched my own retirement money, always thinking I should leave more for him and Kevin. Now I see how foolish that was." Nancy nodded. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to travel," Michelle said, the decision surprising even herself. "When I was young, I always dreamed of seeing the Southwest, the Grand Canyon, Santa Fe, Sedona. But I never had the chance." Nancy's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. I have a cousin who runs a little bed and breakfast in Santa Fe. I can put you in touch." The next day, Michelle used Nancy's phone to call the county office to get replacements for her ID and senior card. Then she went to the bank to report her savings book as lost. Thankfully, she was the only one who knew the password. A week later, with a temporary ID in hand, she withdrew the $7,000 she had saved over the years, money that had been earmarked for Kevin's future, but that would now fund her own new beginning. "Are you really leaving?" Nancy asked on the way to the train station, her voice tinged with sadness. Michelle nodded. "You didn't just save my life, Nancy. You saved my soul." Nancy gave her a tight hug. "Message me when you get there, and remember you can always come back if things don't work out." As Michelle sat on the train heading toward Santa Fe, watching the landscape rush by, she felt a sense of release she had never experienced before. For 69 years, she had lived for everyone else. Her parents, her husband, her son, her grandson. Now, finally, it was her turn to live for herself. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, James Young was in a state of utter panic. After they had driven for some distance that night, Patricia had suddenly said, "Don't you think that was too much, in this rain?" It was as if James had woken from a trance. He slammed on the brakes and spun the car around. "What have I done? I must have been crazy." But when they returned to the spot, Michelle was gone. They called the police, who reviewed the traffic cameras. The footage only showed a blurry figure stumbling toward the rest stop before disappearing into the rain. "If anything happens to her..." James's whole body trembled as he gave his statement at the police station. Patricia was terrified too, but she still tried to sound defiant. "Well, she should have just kept her mouth..." "Shut up!" James screamed at her. "That's my mother! My mother!" In the following days, they printed hundreds of missing person flyers, posted on every social media platform, and even went on a local news program, describing Michelle as a confused elderly woman with mild dementia, who might not remember her address, a complete fabrication born of their guilt and fear. But they had no idea that the confused elderly woman they were looking for was already on a southbound train, starting a new life where no one would call her an old hag again. 3 months later, Michelle sat on a bench by the duck pond in the Santa Fe City Park, watching the birds glide across the water, a smile playing on her lips. These 3 months had been some of the happiest of her life. Nancy's cousin, Carol, had treated Michelle like a sister from the moment she arrived, showing her every charming street and hidden courtyard in the city. The bed and breakfast Carol ran was a small, homey place filled with local art and friendly guests. "You're good for business," Carol had joked after Michelle's second week. "Your stories about the East Coast fascinate the guests during breakfast." Michelle had joined a senior tour group and visited the Grand Canyon and Zion National Park. The majesty of these natural wonders had moved her to tears. She'd taken dozens of photographs with the new smartphone Carol had helped her buy. To her great surprise, in a small gallery in Sedona, she'd met a group of like-minded seniors. They'd made a pact to become snowbirds and go to Florida together for the winter, a plan they were already discussing enthusiastically in a group text on the smartphone she had just learned to use. She had changed so much in these 3 months. She had a chic new short haircut, had bought a stylish floral dress, and learned how to use mobile payments and call an Uber. Carol said she looked at least 10 years younger. Even her chronic high blood pressure had improved significantly. Today was the first weekend after returning to Santa Fe from her Sedona trip, and Michelle had arranged to meet Carol at the mall to buy some local crafts to send to Nancy as a thank you gift. They were in a small shop picking out turquoise jewelry when a familiar voice made Michelle freeze. "Mom," Michelle turned around slowly. It was James. He looked like he had lost a lot of weight, with dark circles under his eyes. He was holding several shopping bags. Beside him stood a shell-shocked Patricia and Kevin. "Grandma!" Kevin broke free from Patricia's grasp and ran to hug Michelle's legs. Tears streamed down Michelle's face as she knelt and hugged her grandson tightly. "Kevin, you've gotten so tall." James rushed over, looking Michelle up and down, taking in her new clothes and hairstyle, then noticing her glowing complexion. He was speechless. Patricia stood a few feet away, her face pale. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. James finally found his voice. "Mom, we've been looking for you for 3 months." Michelle stood up, wiped her tears, and said calmly, "I'm fine. You don't need to worry." Suddenly, James fell to his knees. Right there in the middle of the busy mall, he knelt before her. "Mom, I was wrong," he sobbed like a child. "That night, I don't know what came over me. I deserved to die for what I did." People started to stare and whisper. Carol tactfully led Kevin away to look at some pottery. Michelle looked at her kneeling son, and the peace she had cultivated over the past 3 months shattered. The memories of all the nights she had cried herself to sleep came flooding back. "Get up, don't make a scene," she said softly. He refused. "Mom, please come home with me. These 3 months have been a living hell. The police said you might... He couldn't finish the sentence. Patricia approached, her head bowed. "Michelle, I'm so sorry. That day I was just so impulsive. I never meant those horrible things I said." Michelle looked at the daughter-in-law who had once cursed her so viciously and noticed the new lines around her eyes, the dullness in her hair. She realized then that their past 3 months hadn't been easy either. "I'm not going back," Michelle said, voicing the decision she had made long ago. "I've rented an apartment here in Santa Fe. I've made a lot of friends." James looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, you can't forgive me?" "I forgive you, James," Michelle sighed. "But I can't go back to living the way I did before." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Son, I've had a lot of time to think. After your father passed away, I placed all my hopes on you. That was my mistake. A mother shouldn't stake her entire existence on her child." James stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "I plan to live here for the long term," Michelle continued. "I'll come back to visit Kevin sometimes, and you're always welcome to visit me here." Patricia burst into tears. Michelle, we really know we were wrong. Kevin asks where Grandma went every single day. At the mention of her grandson, Michelle's heart softened. I'll video call him often, she said, pulling out her smartphone. Let's add each other on Facebook. James looked at Michelle, expertly navigating her smartphone, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. Mom, when did you... Michelle smiled. Just because you're old doesn't mean you can't learn new things. They exchanged contact information and agreed to a video call the following week. As they were leaving, James suddenly asked, Mom, were you happy these past 3 months? Michelle looked out the window at the brilliant New Mexico sun. Yes, she said honestly, happier than I've ever been. The look in James's eyes was a complex cocktail of guilt, shock, and something Michelle had never seen there before. Respect. That's good, he whispered. Mom, Michelle patted his shoulder. Go on now. Drive safe. Watching her son and his family walk away, Michelle felt a strange sense of calm. At 69 years old, her life was just beginning. Back in her small rented apartment, Michelle sat in the rocking chair by the window, lost in thought. The sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a warm patch of light on the floor. 3 months ago, she could never have imagined she would reunite with her son's family this way. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Carol. You saw your son. How did it go? Michelle replied. It was calmer than I expected. They don't look like they've been doing well. Carol's reply came quickly. Are you softening? Michelle stared at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. Was she? When she saw James kneeling on that polished mall floor, sobbing his heart out, she did feel a sharp pain in her chest. He was the child she had carried for 9 months, the flesh and blood she had raised. But strangely, apart from that fleeting pang, what she felt more was a sense of release. No, she finally typed back. But I did promise to video call with Kevin. Putting her phone down, Michelle went to the small kitchen to start dinner. The 1-bedroom apartment, which Carol had helped her find, was small but bright and affordable. She had learned to cook a few simple Southwestern dishes and planned to try her hand at a green chile stew she'd had at a restaurant and couldn't stop thinking about. Just as the stew began to simmer, her phone rang. A video call from James. Her heart skipped a beat. They had said next week, but it had only been a few hours. When she answered, Kevin's round face filled the screen. Grandma, he shouted excitedly. Daddy told me to call you. Michelle's eyes instantly filled with tears. Kevin, you're such a good boy. Have you had dinner yet? He pouted adorably. I want to eat Grandma's pot roast. The camera shook, and Michelle saw James's hand on Kevin's shoulder. He looked even more haggard than he had at the mall, his stubble more pronounced. Mom, his voice was hesitant. Kevin wouldn't stop fussing to see you. Michelle adjusted the phone's angle to show the window behind her and the small succulents on the sill. When you come to visit, I'll make it for you, okay? Grandma, why don't you come home? Kevin asked innocently. Your little bed is still there. The question was a knife in Michelle's heart. Off camera, she heard a soft sniffle. It must have been Patricia. James's expression tightened. He quickly changed the subject. Mom, it looks really nice where you are. So much brighter than our house. Michelle went along with it. Yes, it faces south, so it gets great sunlight. And see this? She showed him a woven blanket she had bought in Sedona. Doesn't it look nice on the wall? James stared at the screen, his gaze complicated. Are you getting used to living alone? It's wonderful, Michelle said with a genuine smile. There's a farmer's market right downstairs and a small park across the street. A lot of seniors do Tai Chi there in the morning. I've started joining them. Mom, James started, then stopped. I'll take some time off next week and come get you. It was so matter-of-fact, just like all the times in the past decade he had come to take her to the doctor, to their house for the holidays, or to stay with them after Harold died. As if she were an accessory to be picked up and dropped off. "That's not necessary," Michelle said, her tone gentle but firm. "I want to spend the winter here. The winters in Santa Fe are so pleasant, not cold and damp like back home." Her firm refusal, something he had never heard from his mother, who always just said, "Okay," was met with a stunned silence. After a moment, Patricia's face appeared at the edge of the screen, her eyes red and swollen. "Michelle, Kevin hasn't been eating well lately. The doctor said there's nothing wrong. He's just being picky." Michelle could almost hear the sound of Patricia gritting her teeth, asking for help from the woman she had called an old hag. It must have been incredibly difficult for her. "Try a little ginger ale," Michelle said, catching herself giving the kind of old-fashioned advice Patricia despised. She quickly added, "But of course you should listen to the doctor." To Michelle's surprise, Patricia didn't argue. Instead, she took out her phone to make a note. "How much should I give him?" The question astonished Michelle. It was the first time Patricia had ever sought her advice without immediately dismissing it. As they were about to hang up, a wave of dizziness washed over Michelle, and she gripped the edge of the table. "Mom, what's wrong?" James asked, his eyes sharp with concern. "Nothing," Michelle said quickly, composing herself. "My arm is just getting tired from holding the phone. It's time for Kevin to go to bed, isn't it?" James glanced at the time. "Oh, it's almost 9. He hesitated. "Mom, we really are sorry." "It's in the past," Michelle interrupted. "Let's video call again on the weekend. Give Kevin a kiss for me." After hanging up, Michelle sank into her rocking chair. The dizzy spell was worse than she'd thought. Her blood pressure had indeed improved since coming to Santa Fe, but recently she'd been having these sudden moments of vertigo. She had brushed them off as a normal part of getting older, but maybe it was time to see a doctor. As she rocked slowly in her chair, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold, Michelle felt an unfamiliar emotion bubbling up inside her. It took her a moment to recognize it. It was pride. Pride in herself for having the courage to start over. Pride in creating a life that was truly her own. For the first time in decades, Michelle Young was no longer just someone's wife, someone's mother, or someone's grandmother. She was simply Michelle. And that was enough. The morning sun streamed through Michelle's bedroom window, painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floor. She stretched slowly, savoring the absence of the arthritis pain that had once made every morning a struggle. 2 months in Santa Fe's dry climate had worked wonders for her joints. On her bedside table, her new smartphone buzzed with a notification from her seniors tour group. Today they were meeting to finalize plans for their Grand Canyon trip next week. Michelle smiled, still amazed at how quickly she'd found a community here. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and padded to the small kitchen to make coffee. The apartment was modest, just 1 bedroom with a combined living and dining area, but the large windows and southern exposure filled it with light. Carol had helped her find furnishings at local thrift stores and estate sales, creating a space that felt like home in a way her old apartment never had. As she sipped her coffee, Michelle opened her banking app, another new skill she'd mastered. Her Social Security check had been deposited, and after paying rent, she still had enough for her daily expenses and to save a little for her travels. She'd been careful with the $7,000 she'd withdrawn, keeping most of it in a savings account as an emergency fund. Financial independence, she murmured to herself, still finding the concept novel after decades of stretching every dollar to support James and later to help with Kevin. The smartphone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from Nancy. "How's Santa Fe treating you? Still planning Grand Canyon next week?" Michelle smiled and typed back, her fingers still awkward on the touch screen. "Best decision of my life. Yes. Grand Canyon with senior group. How are you? Nancy's reply came quickly. Proud of you. Taking my mom's old photos to be digitized today. Thinking of you. Michelle's throat tightened with emotion. In just 2 months, Nancy had become a closer friend than anyone she'd known in decades. She wondered briefly if James had ever reached out to Nancy at the rest stop while searching for her. Probably not. He'd never think to look there. Thoughts of James still brought a pang of sadness, but the sharp pain had dulled. She checked her phone for messages from him every morning, but after their video call 2 months ago, communication had become sporadic. A few texts asking if she was okay, another video call where Kevin seemed subdued, and then mostly silence. Patricia had sent a stiff message about some of Michelle's belongings they'd packed up, asking where to send them. Michelle had given them Carol's address at the B&B, but had never received anything. Pushing those thoughts aside, Michelle got dressed in comfortable walking shoes and a light jacket. The senior center was hosting a watercolor painting class that morning, and she didn't want to be late. The 15-minute walk to the center took her through a small park where groups of elderly people were already doing Tai Chi. Michelle waved to a few familiar faces. Next week, she planned to join them. The senior center was housed in a converted adobe building, its interior cool and peaceful. Michelle signed in at the front desk, greeted by Marge, the coordinator who remembered everyone's name. Michelle, you're just in time. Robert's setting up in the art room. Robert? Michelle asked, confused. The usual instructor was a woman named Diane. Oh, that's right. You haven't met him yet. Robert Thompson is our new watercolor instructor, retired art teacher from the middle school, quite talented. Michelle nodded and made her way to the art room. Inside, about a dozen seniors were already seated at tables covered with plastic sheets. At the front, a tall man with silver hair and glasses was arranging supplies. Welcome, everyone, he said when the clock struck 10. I'm Robert Thompson, your new watercolor instructor. I believe in learning by doing, so today we'll dive right in with a simple landscape. His voice was warm and authoritative, the kind that immediately commanded attention without being harsh. As he demonstrated brush techniques, Michelle found herself drawn to the gentle way his hands moved across the paper, creating something beautiful with just a few strokes. The key to watercolor is letting go, Robert explained. You can guide the water, but ultimately it flows where it wants to. Our job is to work with it, not against it. Something about his words resonated with Michelle beyond the context of painting. Wasn't that what she was learning to do with her life? To flow in new directions instead of fighting the current? After the demonstration, Robert walked around the room, offering guidance to each student. When he reached Michelle, he paused longer than he had with others. You have a steady hand, he noted, watching as she carefully applied a wash of blue for the sky. Have you painted before? Michelle shook her head. Not since grade school art class. You have a natural feel for it. See how you're letting the pigment find its own path? That's instinctive for you. Michelle felt a warmth rise to her cheeks at the unexpected praise. Thank you. I'm just trying to follow your instructions. Some people can follow instructions all day and never feel the paint, Robert said with a smile. Others, like you, have an innate sense for it. As he moved on to the next student, Michelle found herself watching him, the way he leaned down to eye level with the seniors who were struggling, how he demonstrated techniques with patient repetition, never showing frustration. There was something comforting about his presence that reminded her of Harold in his better days, before the drinking had started. After class, as Michelle was cleaning her brushes, Robert approached her again. Michelle, right? Marge mentioned you're new to Santa Fe. She nodded. About 2 months now. How are you finding it? It's wonderful, Michelle said sincerely. Everyone has been so welcoming. We have a small group that meets on Thursdays for outdoor painting sessions. Nothing formal, just a few of us setting up easels in the park or by the creek. You'd be welcome to join us. Michelle hesitated. Apart from the organized senior center activities and tour groups, she hadn't ventured into more intimate social settings. "I don't have any supplies," she said, which was true but also an excuse. "We have extras," Robert countered with an easy smile. "No pressure, but the offer stands. We meet at Cathedral Park at 4. The evening light this time of year is spectacular." Before Michelle could respond, another student called Robert over with a question, and the moment passed. But as she walked home, his invitation lingered in her mind. There had been something in his eyes, a gentle understanding that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. That afternoon, Michelle found herself standing at the edge of Cathedral Park at 3:55 p.m., feeling oddly nervous. She spotted a small group setting up easels near a flowering tree and recognized Robert's tall figure among them. He noticed her immediately and waved her over. "Michelle, you came. I'm so glad." "I hope I'm not intruding," she said hesitantly. "Not at all. Everyone, this is Michelle Young, a natural talent I discovered this morning. Michelle, meet Elaine, Hector, and Dorothy." The group welcomed her warmly, and Robert handed her a small field easel and a basic set of watercolors. "These are extras I keep for newcomers. Consider them on loan until you decide if outdoor painting is for you." For the next 2 hours, Michelle lost herself in the simple joy of creating. Robert occasionally offered gentle suggestions, but mostly he let her explore the medium on her own. When the light began to fade, they packed up their supplies. "Same time next week?" Robert asked as they walked toward the parking lot. "I'd like that," Michelle said, surprised by how much she meant it. "Would you like a ride home? It's getting dark." Michelle started to decline automatically, then stopped herself. Why not accept help when offered kindly? "That would be nice, thank you." In Robert's modest sedan, conversation flowed easily. He told her about his 30-year teaching career, his late wife Claire, who had passed away from cancer 3 years ago, and his daughter, who lived in California with his 2 grandchildren. "What brought you to Santa Fe?" he asked as they neared her apartment. Michelle hesitated, unsure how much to share. "A fresh start," she finally said. "My husband passed 5 years ago, and I needed a change of scenery." Robert nodded, seeming to sense there was more to the story, but not pressing. "Well, Santa Fe is a good place for reinvention. The light here changes everything it touches." After he dropped her off, Michelle stood on her small balcony, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. She felt lighter somehow, as if she'd shed another layer of the person she used to be. That night, she dreamed of Harold, not the troubled man he'd become in his later years, but the gentle young man she'd fallen in love with, who had promised to build her a house with windows facing the sunrise. In the dream, he smiled at her and said, "You finally found your sunrise, Michelle." She woke with tears on her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time, memories of the good years with Harold felt like a blessing rather than a wound. Later that week, Michelle's group embarked on their trip to the Grand Canyon. Standing at the edge of that vast, ancient chasm, Michelle felt simultaneously insignificant and limitless. The tour guide explained how the Colorado River had carved this wonder over millions of years. Patient, persistent, unstoppable. "Like water finding its path," she whispered to herself, remembering Robert's words about watercolor. That evening, sitting around a campfire with her new friends, Michelle felt a connection she hadn't experienced in decades. These were people who didn't know her as James's mother or Kevin's grandmother. They knew her as Michelle, a woman with stories to tell, jokes to share, and dreams still unfulfilled. "I never thought I'd see the Grand Canyon," she admitted as they toasted marshmallows. "It was always something I planned to do someday." "That's the trap, isn't it?" said Elaine, a retired librarian. "Putting off joy until some future date that never arrives." My Walter was like that, added Dorothy, always talking about what we'd do when he retired. Then he died 6 months before his retirement date, and all those plans went with him. Michelle nodded, thinking of all the dreams she had deferred. The community college classes she'd wanted to take, the road trips she and Harold had planned before his accident at the factory had changed everything. "It's never too late," said Hector, a former postal worker, with an infectious laugh. "My mother learned to swim at 82, said she didn't want to meet her maker without feeling what it was like to float." They all laughed, and Michelle felt a surge of affection for these new friends who understood what it meant to carry decades of life experience, both the weight and the wisdom of it. When they returned to Santa Fe 3 days later, Michelle's phone was filled with photos of vast canyons and bright stars, of new friends smiling against breathtaking backdrops. She sent a few to Nancy, who responded with enthusiastic emojis, and after some hesitation, she sent one to James with the simple caption, "Grand Canyon trip with friends." His response came hours later. "Looks amazing, Mom. Glad you're having fun." There was something in the brevity of his message that hinted at more complex emotions, but Michelle didn't probe. Their relationship was different now, more distant but also healthier in some ways. He was learning that she could exist without him, and she was learning that she could love him without sacrificing herself. The Thursday painting group became a highlight of Michelle's week. Under Robert's patient guidance, her skills improved rapidly. There was a freedom in painting that she'd never experienced before, a permission to make mistakes, to experiment, to see beauty in unexpected places. "You have a gift for capturing light," Robert told her one evening as they packed up their supplies. "Not everyone can see it the way you do." Their friendship deepened gradually. Robert began driving her home after each session, and sometimes they'd stop for coffee or a light dinner. He was careful never to push too fast, seeming to sense her hesitation about new relationships. One evening, as they sat in a small cafe after painting, Robert asked the question Michelle had been dreading. "Michelle, I hope you don't mind my asking, but I get the feeling there's more to your fresh start story. You don't have to tell me if you'd rather not." Michelle stared into her tea, considering how much to share. Finally, she looked up and met his kind eyes. "My son abandoned me on the side of a highway during a rainstorm 3 months ago," she said simply. "He and his wife they didn't want me in their lives anymore. I was a burden." Robert's face registered shock, then deep sadness. "I'm so sorry, Michelle. That's unimaginable." She found herself telling him everything. The years of subtle undermining from Patricia, James's growing impatience with her, the fateful birthday dinner, and finally the moment her son had struck her and left her in the storm. "A stranger at a rest stop took me in," she concluded. "Nancy, she saved my life in more ways than one. She helped me see that I still had choices." Robert reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. "Thank you for trusting me with your story. It explains so much about your paintings. There's a resilience in them, a quality of light emerging from darkness." Michelle felt tears threaten but blinked them away. "The strange thing is, I'm almost grateful it happened. I might never have found this new life otherwise." "The most beautiful glazes often come from the hottest fires," Robert said softly. Walking her to her door later, Robert hesitated. "Would you like to come to dinner at my place on Saturday? I make a decent green chili stew, though I'm sure not as good as yours." Michelle felt a flutter of anxiety. This felt like more than friendship, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. But then she remembered Dorothy's words about her husband's deferred dreams. "I'd like that very much," she said. Saturday evening found Michelle standing outside Robert's door, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked in the park and a loaf of bread from her favorite bakery. She'd spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear before settling on a simple turquoise blouse that Carol had insisted brought out the color in her eyes. Robert's home was a small adobe house with a walled garden. Inside, the space reflected its owner, warm, unpretentious, filled with art and books. Family photos showed a younger Robert with a smiling woman Michelle assumed was Claire, and a college-aged girl who must be his daughter. "You have a lovely home," Michelle said, handing him the flowers and bread. "Thank you. It's not fancy, but it suits me." He took the flowers with a smile. "These are beautiful. Let me put them in water." Dinner was delicious. The promised green chile stew served with fresh tortillas and a simple salad. Robert opened a bottle of wine but noticed Michelle's hesitation. "Not a wine drinker?" he asked. Michelle shook her head. "My husband had problems with alcohol in his later years. I don't have good associations with it." "Say no more," Robert said, immediately removing the wine glass and replacing it with water. "I have sparkling cider if you prefer that." The ease with which he accommodated her preference without judgment or awkwardness touched Michelle deeply. After dinner, they sat in his small courtyard, where string lights twinkled among potted plants. The conversation flowed naturally from art to books to childhood memories. When Michelle mentioned her early dream of becoming a kindergarten teacher, abandoned when she became pregnant with James at 20, Robert listened with genuine interest. "It's never too late, you know," he said. "Not to teach kindergarten, perhaps, but there are so many ways to share your natural gift with children. The senior center has a grandparent reading program at the local elementary school." "Do you think I could do something like that?" Michelle asked, surprised by how much the idea appealed to her. "Without question. Your patience and warmth would be perfect for it." As the evening wound down, Robert walked her to her door. There was a moment of awkward silence, both of them sensing a shift in their relationship, but uncertain how to navigate it. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Michelle said finally. "It's been a long time since I've felt so comfortable with someone." Robert smiled. "The feeling is mutual. Would it be all right if I call you tomorrow?" "I'd like that," Michelle replied. He leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to step back if she wanted, and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. "Good night, Michelle." "Good night, Robert." Inside her apartment, Michelle touched her cheek where his kiss lingered. At 69, she felt like a teenager experiencing first love, with all the uncertainty and excitement that entailed. She had never expected to feel this way again. Her phone buzzed with a text notification. Expecting Robert, she was surprised to see James's name. "Mom, Kevin's been asking to video chat. Are you free tomorrow afternoon?" Michelle typed back, "Yes, 2 p.m. your time works for me." The next day, preparing for the call, Michelle felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was eager to see Kevin's face, to hear his little boy stories and watch his expressions. Another part dreaded seeing James and Patricia, the painful memories still too fresh. At precisely 2 p.m., her phone rang. When she answered, Kevin's face filled the screen. "Grandma, I lost my front tooth," he announced immediately, showing her the gap in his smile. "That's wonderful, sweetie. Did the tooth fairy come?" Kevin nodded enthusiastically. "She left me $5, and Dad says when all my baby teeth are gone, I'll be a big boy." Michelle chatted with Kevin for several minutes about his school and friends before James appeared in the frame. "Hi, Mom. You look different." "Good different." Michelle touched her hair self-consciously. She'd had it cut in a stylish bob just the week before. "Thank you. How are things?" "We're okay," James said, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. "Work is busy. Patricia started a new position at the hospital." Michelle nodded, noticing that Patricia wasn't part of the call. "That's good to hear." There was an awkward pause before James continued. Mom, we've been thinking. Kevin's school has a Grandparents' Day coming up next month. He'd really like you to be there. We could fly you in for the weekend. The invitation caught Michelle off guard. I'll have to check my calendar. When exactly is it? James looked surprised that she might have commitments. The 15th. It's a Friday. Let me get back to you on that, Michelle said, buying time to process her feelings. I'll need to look at my schedule. After more small talk and another chat with Kevin, the call ended. Michelle sat in her rocking chair, conflicted emotions swirling. Part of her yearned to see Kevin in person, to hug him and be part of his life again. Another part feared stepping back into the home where she had been made to feel so unwelcome, so obsolete. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Hope your call went well. Still on for painting in the park tomorrow? Michelle smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Later that week, during her regular call with Nancy, Michelle shared her dilemma about James's invitation. What are you afraid of? Nancy asked directly. Michelle considered the question. Losing myself again. Going back to being just Mom or Grandma instead of Michelle. Then don't let that happen, Nancy said firmly. You're not the same person who got into that car on Kevin's birthday. You're stronger now, with boundaries. Besides, it's just a visit, not a permanent move. You're right, Michelle admitted. I'm giving the situation too much power. Exactly. You can be a loving grandmother without sacrificing your independence, and you'll have a home in Santa Fe to return to afterward. After they hung up, Michelle texted James. I'd love to come for Grandparents' Day. Please send the details. His response was immediate. Great. Kevin will be so happy. I'll book your flights tomorrow. That night, Michelle dreamed again of Harold. They were young, walking along a beach they had visited on their honeymoon. Harold turned to her and said, You found your way back to yourself, Mickey. It was his old nickname for her, one she hadn't heard in decades. She woke feeling peaceful, as if she'd received a blessing from beyond. The next few weeks passed in a pleasant rhythm of painting sessions with Robert, volunteer work at the senior center, and preparations for her trip. Robert had convinced her to join the grandparent reading program, and she spent 2 mornings a week reading to first graders at the local elementary school. The children's enthusiasm and the way they looked at her with admiration rather than pity was deeply healing. Her relationship with Robert continued to deepen gradually. They had shared several more dinners, a concert in the park, and long walks exploring Santa Fe's hidden courtyards and gardens. He had kissed her properly now, a gentle, sweet kiss that had left her breathless despite its tenderness. Is this too fast? He had asked afterward. We can take all the time you need. At our age, there's no time to waste, Michelle had replied, surprising herself with her boldness. The evening before her flight to visit James, she and Robert sat in her apartment sharing a simple dinner she had prepared. Will you be okay going back there? Robert asked, concern evident in his eyes. Michelle nodded. I think so. I'm not the same person they left on that highway. I'm stronger now, more certain of who I am. You absolutely are, Robert agreed. But if you need me, I'm just a phone call away. Thank you, Michelle said, touched by his concern. It helps knowing I have a life to come back to here. Robert took her hand across the table. Michelle, I know we've only known each other a short time, but I want you to know, you've brought color back into my life. After Claire died, I thought that part of my life was over. But with you, I see the world in vivid hues again. Tears welled in Michelle's eyes. I feel the same way. It's unexpected and a little frightening, but wonderful too. We have time, Robert assured her. All the time we need to figure this out together. As he held her close that evening, Michelle felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever happened during her visit to James's home, she knew she had found something precious in Santa Fe. Not just independence, but the possibility of a new kind of partnership based on mutual respect and genuine caring. The next morning, as she boarded the plane with a small suitcase containing gifts for Kevin and her smartest outfit for Grandparents' Day, Michelle felt a strange mix of anxiety and confidence. She was returning to the place of her deepest hurt, but she was returning as a different woman, one who had walked through fire and emerged stronger, more vibrant, and more alive than ever before. The airport terminal buzzed with activity as Michelle stepped off the plane. She adjusted her new blouse, a turquoise silk that Robert had said matched her eyes, and scanned the crowd for James. Her heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Then she spotted him, standing awkwardly near baggage claim. James looked thinner than she remembered, the circles under his eyes more pronounced. When he saw her, his expression cycled through several emotions: relief, guilt, and something that might have been admiration. "Mom," he said, stepping forward hesitantly, "you look really good." "Thank you, James." Michelle allowed him to take her small suitcase. "How's Kevin? Is he excited about tomorrow?" "He's been talking about nothing else for days," James replied, leading her toward the parking lot. "He made you a special name tag for the event." The drive to James's house was filled with awkward small talk. James mentioned work projects, Kevin's school activities, the unseasonably warm weather. Everything except the incident that had severed their relationship 3 months ago. Michelle responded politely but maintained a certain distance, a new boundary that seemed to confuse James. "We've set up the guest room for you," he said as they pulled into the driveway. "Patricia wanted to give you the master bedroom, but I thought you might prefer your own bathroom." Michelle noted the consideration with surprise. "The guest room will be perfect, thank you." As they entered the house, Michelle braced herself for seeing Patricia again. The last time they had been face to face, Patricia had called her an old hag and threatened to make her sleep in the trash. How did one move past such cruelty? The answer, it seemed, was through sincere remorse. Patricia stood in the entryway, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Her normally perfect appearance seemed slightly disheveled, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. "Michelle," she said softly, "thank you for coming." She stepped forward as if to hug Michelle, then hesitated, clearly unsure if the gesture would be welcome. Michelle decided to make it easier on everyone. She stepped forward and gave Patricia a brief, polite hug. "Thank you for having me." Before the moment could become more awkward, the sound of running feet broke the tension. Kevin barreled down the hallway, launching himself at Michelle with such force that she nearly lost her balance. "Grandma, you came! I told all my friends you were coming to Grandparents' Day." Michelle knelt down, ignoring the protest in her knees, and hugged her grandson properly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart." Kevin pulled back, his face serious. "Did you bring your special pot roast?" Michelle laughed, glancing up at Patricia, who to her surprise nodded encouragingly. "Not this time, but maybe I could make it while I'm here? If that's okay with your mom and dad?" "Yes, please," Kevin bounced excitedly. "Mom tried to make it, but it wasn't the same." Patricia's face flushed slightly. "I did try to follow your recipe from memory. It didn't turn out quite right." The admission that Patricia had attempted to recreate Michelle's cooking for Kevin's sake was unexpected and touching. Michelle smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving. "I'd be happy to show you my technique. It's all in how long you sear the meat before adding the liquid." Kevin tugged at Michelle's hand. "Come see my room. I made it super clean for you." As Michelle allowed herself to be led upstairs, she noticed the subtle changes in the house. Family photos now adorned walls that had once been austere and minimalist. A child's artwork was proudly displayed on the refrigerator. The house felt warmer somehow, less like a showplace and more like a home. Kevin's room was indeed remarkably tidy, with books and toys neatly organized on shelves. On his bedside table sat a framed photograph Michelle had never seen before, a younger version of herself holding baby Kevin. "Where did you get this?" she asked, picking up the frame. "Dad found it in the garage. He said it was important to remember family." Michelle's throat tightened with emotion. She set the photograph down carefully and listened as Kevin enthusiastically showed her his favorite books and toys. Dinner that evening was a subdued affair. Patricia had prepared Michelle's favorite chicken dish, another unexpected gesture, and James seemed determined to keep the conversation light, focusing on Kevin's school achievements and avoiding anything controversial. After Kevin was tucked into bed, however, the moment Michelle had been dreading finally arrived. The three adults sat in the living room, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them. James cleared his throat. "Mom, I know we need to talk about what happened. I've been trying to find the words to apologize, but everything seems inadequate." "What happened that night was unforgivable," Patricia added softly. "We've both been in therapy since then, trying to understand how we could have done something so cruel." Michelle studied their faces, searching for signs of the contempt she had seen that rainy night. Instead, she saw genuine remorse and shame. "I won't pretend it didn't hurt," Michelle said finally. "It did, deeply. But I've had time to reflect, and in a strange way, I'm almost grateful." James looked shocked. "Grateful? If you hadn't left me on that highway, I might never have found the courage to start over. I might never have discovered painting or made new friends or learned that I'm more than just someone's mother or grandmother." Michelle paused, choosing her words carefully. "What you did was wrong, James, but what came after has been transformative." "You seem different," Patricia said hesitantly. "More confident." Michelle nodded. "I am different. I've built a life for myself in Santa Fe, a good life with purpose and friendship." "And is there someone special?" James asked, clearly having noticed the unfamiliar jewelry Michelle wore, a turquoise pendant Robert had given her. Michelle felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "His name is Robert. He's an art teacher at the senior center. He's been very kind." James and Patricia exchanged a glance laden with unspoken communication. Michelle recognized it as the look of a couple who had discussed this possibility beforehand. "We're happy for you, Mom," James said finally. "Really, thank you." Michelle stood, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the evening. "If you don't mind, I think I'll turn in early. Tomorrow is a big day." In the guest room, Michelle sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She took out her phone and texted Robert. "Made it safely, everyone being very polite. Miss you." His response came immediately. "Miss you too. Remember who you are now. Sleep well." Michelle smiled at the screen. 4 simple words. Remember who you are. But they steadied her like an anchor in rough seas. The next morning, Grandparents' Day at Kevin's school was a whirlwind of activity. Kevin proudly introduced Michelle to his teacher and friends, showing off her artistic talents to anyone who would listen. "My grandma can paint mountains and skies," he announced to his classmates. "She lives where they make the best tacos ever." Michelle found herself surrounded by other grandparents, many of whom lived locally and saw their grandchildren regularly. When they asked about her situation, she surprised herself by answering honestly. "I live in Santa Fe now. I visit when I can, but I've built a life there with painting classes and volunteer work." Rather than the judgment she expected, she received nods of understanding and even admiration. "Good for you," said one grandmother in her 70s. "My daughter wanted me to sell my house and move in with them after my husband died. I told her no way. I've got bridge club and my garden. We can FaceTime any time. As the day progressed, Michelle observed James and Patricia together. There was a tension between them that hadn't been present 3 months ago. They were polite to each other, but rarely made eye contact, and Patricia seemed to flinch slightly when James moved too quickly near her. During lunch in the school cafeteria, Kevin went off to play with friends, giving Michelle a moment alone with her son. "Is everything okay between you and Patricia?" she asked directly. James looked startled, then resigned. "We're working through some things. After what happened with you, it brought up a lot of issues we'd been ignoring. Patricia's been dealing with some childhood trauma related to her own parents. It doesn't excuse what she said to you, but it helps explain it." Michelle nodded, remembering how Patricia's parents had been distant and critical during the few times she had met them. "And what about you, James? What explains what you did?" James flinched as if she had struck him. "I've been asking myself that every day. The therapist says I have anger issues stemming from Dad's behavior, that I learned patterns I never dealt with." He looked down at his hands. "That's not an excuse. Nothing excuses what I did to you." Michelle felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness for the pain her son was clearly in, anger at the memory of that night, and strangely a sense of freedom from the cycle of dysfunction that had bound their family for generations. "Your father had demons he never conquered," Michelle said softly. "But you have a choice, James. You can get help and break the cycle, or you can let it destroy your family like it nearly destroyed ours." James looked up, tears in his eyes. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." "I know," Michelle said, patting his hand gently. "That's why I'm here." That evening, Michelle insisted on cooking dinner for everyone. As she moved around the kitchen with Kevin as her helper, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. This was no longer her home, her domain, her responsibility. She was a visitor bringing joy and skills, not a servant expected to provide them. Patricia hovered uncertainly at the edge of the kitchen. "Can I help?" "You can chop the vegetables if you'd like," Michelle offered, handing her a knife and cutting board. "Kevin, show your mom how to cut the carrots into coins like I taught you." Working together, they created a meal that felt like a bridge between past and present. Michelle's traditional pot roast, but with a few modern touches, Patricia suggested. The act of cooking together seemed to ease some of the tension in the house. During dinner, Kevin chattered happily about school and friends. James and Patricia participated in the conversation, asking Michelle questions about her life in Santa Fe, seemingly genuinely interested in her answers. As Michelle described her painting classes and her volunteer work reading to children, she noticed a shift in how they looked at her. No longer with impatience or dismissal, but with something approaching respect. After Kevin was in bed, Michelle took out her tablet and showed them photos of her apartment, the senior center, and some of her watercolor paintings. The last photo was of Michelle and Robert at the Grand Canyon, their heads close together as they smiled for the camera. "He seems nice," Patricia said, studying the photo. "He has kind eyes." "He is kind," Michelle agreed, "and patient. He's teaching me to see the world differently through art." James stared at the photo longer than necessary. "You look happy, Mom. Happier than I've seen you in maybe ever." "I am happy," Michelle said simply. "I've discovered parts of myself I never knew existed." Later that night, as Michelle prepared for bed, there was a soft knock at her door. It was Patricia, holding a cup of herbal tea. "I thought you might like this before bed," she said, offering the cup. "It's chamomile with honey, the way you used to make it for James when he couldn't sleep." Michelle accepted the tea with surprise. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." Patricia lingered in the doorway. "Michelle, I need to say something that's been on my mind since that night." She took a deep breath. What I called you? That horrible name. It's unforgivable. I want you to know that I've never thought of you that way. I was lashing out because I was jealous. Jealous? Michelle was genuinely confused. Of your relationship with Kevin, of how easily you connect with him. My own mother she was cold, critical. Everything I did was wrong. Patricia's voice broke. I see how naturally you love Kevin, and it reminds me of what I never had. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Michelle felt her anger toward Patricia soften slightly, seeing her not as an enemy, but as a wounded woman struggling with her own demons. Thank you for telling me that, Michelle said finally. It helps me understand. Patricia nodded, wiping away a tear. Good night, Michelle, and thank you for giving us another chance. After Patricia left, Michelle sat on the edge of the bed, sipping the tea and reflecting on the day. She reached for her phone and dialed Robert's number. Hello, beautiful, he answered. How was Grandparents' Day? Illuminating, Michelle replied, and proceeded to tell him about the complex emotions and revelations of the day. It sounds like they're genuinely trying to make amends, Robert observed when she finished. I think they are, Michelle agreed. But the strange thing is, I no longer need their approval, or even their remorse to feel whole. I'm grateful for it, especially for Kevin's sake, but my sense of self doesn't depend on it anymore. That's the most beautiful thing about you, Michelle, Robert said softly. You've learned to bloom where you're planted, even after being uprooted by a storm. The metaphor reminded her of their watercolor lessons, and she smiled. I miss you. I miss you too. Santa Fe isn't the same without you. They talked for a while longer before saying goodnight. As Michelle drifted toward sleep, she realized something profound. She was no longer afraid of going home, because home was no longer a place or even a person. Home was the sense of peace she had found within herself, a peace that would travel with her wherever she went. The next morning, Michelle woke with a splitting headache. She reached for the glass of water beside her bed, but her arm felt strangely heavy. As she tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and the room began to spin. Her last conscious thought before darkness claimed her was how ironic it would be to have survived abandonment only to die in the guest room of the very people who had abandoned her. Mrs. Young, can you hear me? The voice sounded distant, as if traveling through water. Michelle struggled to open her eyes, the bright lights above her sending sharp pains through her skull. She's responding, another voice said. Blood pressure still elevated at 190/110. Michelle tried to speak, but found a mask covering her face. Panic surged through her as she realized she couldn't move her left arm properly. Where was she? What had happened? A gentle hand touched her right hand. Mrs. Young, you're in the hospital. You had a stroke. Try to stay calm. A stroke. The words filtered through the fog in her brain. She remembered waking up in James's guest room, the sudden dizziness, the world tilting sideways. Had someone found her? How long had she been unconscious? Faces swam into view. A young female doctor, a nurse adjusting something on a monitor, and James, his face gray with fear. When he saw her eyes open, he leaned forward. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank God. You're going to be okay. The doctor explained that Michelle had suffered a mild ischemic stroke, affecting her left side. They had started medication to break up the clot, but needed to monitor her closely. James squeezed her right hand. I found you when I came to wake you for breakfast. You weren't responding. I called 911. His voice cracked again. I thought I was going to lose you. Hours blurred together as Michelle drifted in and out of consciousness. Tests, medications, Quiet conversations just beyond her comprehension all flowed around her like water around a stone. The only constants were the persistent numbness in her left arm and the throbbing pain behind her eyes. When she finally regained full awareness, night had fallen. James was asleep in a chair beside her, his hand still clutching hers. He looked utterly exhausted, the stubble on his face suggesting he hadn't left her side for hours. "James," she managed, her voice raspy. He jerked awake immediately. "Mom, you're awake!" He leaned forward, searching her face. "Do you know where you are? Do you recognize me?" "Hospital," she whispered. "What happened?" "You had a stroke," he explained gently. "A small one, the doctors say. They caught it early because I found you right away." His voice broke again. "If I'd slept in a little longer—" "Not your fault," Michelle insisted, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had. The door opened quietly, and Patricia entered with 2 cups of coffee. She froze when she saw Michelle awake, relief washing over her face. "Michelle, you're awake. Should I get the nurse?" "Already paged," James said, nodding toward the call button in his hand. "Where's Kevin?" "My sister took him home. He was getting too upset." Patricia approached the bed cautiously. "How are you feeling, Michelle?" "Tired," Michelle admitted. "Left arm heavy." Patricia nodded, blinking back tears. "The doctor said that might happen. It should improve with therapy." Dr. Rivera entered and examined Michelle thoroughly, explaining that the stroke was relatively minor, caught early enough that they were able to administer clot-busting medication quickly. "You're likely to experience some weakness on your left side and possibly some speech difficulties, but with proper therapy, we expect a significant recovery." When Michelle asked about going home, Dr. Rivera looked sympathetic. "We need to keep you for observation for at least a few days. Then we'll need to discuss your aftercare plan. Do you live alone?" Before Michelle could respond, James spoke up. "She lives in Santa Fe, but she'll be staying with us during her recovery." He glanced at Michelle. "If that's okay with you, Mom." Michelle's heart sank. The thought of becoming dependent on James and Patricia, after everything she'd worked so hard to build in Santa Fe, felt like a cruel joke. "We'll talk about options tomorrow," Dr. Rivera said diplomatically, noticing Michelle's distress. After the doctor left, Michelle managed to ask James to call Robert. James looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Patricia already did. We found his number in your phone. He's very concerned. Said he'd come right away if you needed him." The next few days passed in a blur of tests, consultations, and therapy assessments. On the 3rd day, as Michelle sat in a chair beside her hospital bed attempting to button a cardigan with stubborn fingers, there was a knock at her door. "Visitor for you," the nurse announced cheerfully. Michelle looked up, expecting James or Patricia. Instead, Robert Thompson stood in the doorway, his tall figure slightly stooped with worry, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "Robert!" Michelle's voice cracked with emotion. "Michelle!" He crossed the room in 3 strides and carefully took her right hand, mindful of the IV. "I had to come. Your son called yesterday to update me, and I caught the first flight out." "You shouldn't have," Michelle began. "Yes, I should have," Robert interrupted gently. "What kind of friend would I be if I didn't?" He set the flowers on the bedside table and pulled a chair close. "How are you feeling? Really?" Michelle felt tears welling up. With James and Patricia, she had maintained a brave front, but with Robert, the walls crumbled. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I can't paint anymore? What if I can't live independently?" Robert squeezed her hand. "One step at a time. The doctor seems very optimistic about your recovery, and whatever challenges come, we'll face them together." "We?" Michelle looked at him uncertainly. Unless you'd prefer to face them alone, he said with a gentle smile. But I'm offering my friendship and support in whatever capacity you need. Before Michelle could respond, James entered carrying a coffee tray. He stopped abruptly when he saw Robert. "Oh, you must be Mr. Thompson. I didn't realize you'd arrived already." Robert stood and extended his hand. "Please call me Robert. Thank you for calling me about Michelle's condition." James shook his hand, studying the older man with an intensity that made Michelle uncomfortable. The two men eventually agreed to talk while Michelle attended her physical therapy session. When Michelle returned to her room, exhausted and disheartened from struggling with simple tasks, she found James and Robert engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. They fell silent when she entered, both wearing expressions that suggested they'd reached some kind of understanding. Later, James revealed that he had told Robert about that night, about abandoning Michelle in the rain. He was angry at first, said he couldn't imagine how anyone could abandon their mother that way. But then he said he was grateful it happened in a way, because it led you to Santa Fe, to finding yourself, to meeting him. James then broached the subject of Michelle's aftercare. "We want you to come stay with us, at least until you're strong enough to manage on your own again. We've already started converting the downstairs study into a bedroom, so you won't have to deal with stairs." The thought of being dependent on James and Patricia filled Michelle with dread. "I don't know, James," she said honestly. "I need time to think about it." The next morning, Robert arrived with a small sketchbook and colored pencils. "The nurse said you might be bored between therapy sessions," he explained. "I thought perhaps you could try some drawing to keep your creative muscles from atrophying." As they talked, Robert offered an unexpected alternative. "Come stay with me in Santa Fe. My house has a ground-floor guest room with its own bathroom. You could continue your therapy with the doctors there, maintain your independence as much as possible, and I'd be there to help when needed." Michelle stared at him, speechless. "Robert, that's too much to ask." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He took her right hand. "Michelle, I care about you deeply. These past months have been the happiest I've known since Claire died. I want to help you through this, not out of obligation, but because—" He paused, gathering his courage. "Because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and profound. That evening, when James visited, Michelle told him she had decided to accept Robert's offer. James looked hurt. "You'd rather stay with a man you've known for a few months than with your own family?" "It's not about choosing him over you," Michelle explained gently. "It's about returning to the life I was building before this happened. Santa Fe is my home now, James. My friends are there, my activities, my sense of purpose." Patricia, surprising both Michelle and James, supported her decision. "Your mother has proven she's perfectly capable of making her own choices. We need to respect that." James struggled visibly, but finally relented. "I just want you to be safe and happy, Mom. If you really believe that's in Santa Fe with Robert, then I'll support your decision." The next day, James arrived with a surprising announcement. "Patricia and I have been talking," he began. "We understand why you want to return to Santa Fe, and we respect that decision. So we've decided to rent a place in Santa Fe for the summer. I can work remotely, and Kevin's school year ends next week. That way we can be nearby during your initial recovery without intruding on your independence." Michelle was speechless. This was the last thing she had expected. A compromise that acknowledged her needs while allowing James to feel he was fulfilling his responsibilities as a son. "Are you sure?" she asked when she found her voice. "That's a big disruption for your family." "We're sure," James said firmly. "Kevin's excited about the mountains. Patricia has already researched the art scene there, and I want to get to know the place that gave my mother back to herself." The day before Michelle was scheduled to be discharged, Dr. Rivera arrived with unexpected news. "Mrs. Young, your latest scans show a small area of concern that wasn't visible on the initial images. It's probably nothing serious, but we'd like to keep you for a few more days of observation and run some additional tests." As the days stretched into a week, Michelle began to worry. The additional tests seemed to be multiplying rather than concluding, and Dr. Rivera's expression grew increasingly guarded during her visits. Finally, 10 days after her scheduled discharge date, Dr. Rivera arrived with a neurologist Michelle hadn't met before, an older man with kind eyes and a serious demeanor. "Mrs. Young," Dr. Rivera began, "this is Dr. Patel, our chief of neurology. He's been consulting on your case, Dr." Patel explained that the additional imaging had revealed a small aneurysm in Michelle's brain. "It's likely congenital, something you were born with, but the stroke may have weakened the vessel wall further. We need to repair it surgically to prevent it from rupturing in the future." The word surgery echoed in Michelle's mind. "Brain surgery?" she whispered. "Yes, but it's a relatively routine procedure with a high success rate," Dr. Patel assured her. "We use a minimally invasive approach, inserting a small device through an artery in your leg that travels up to the brain to reinforce the weakened area." The surgery was scheduled for 2 days later. Robert, James, Patricia, and even Nancy, who had flown in immediately upon hearing the news, took turns keeping Michelle company as she processed this new development. The morning of the surgery, Michelle woke early, a strange calm having replaced her earlier anxiety. As the nurses prepared her, she was surrounded by her loved ones, Robert, James, Patricia, Nancy, and Carol, all there to support her. "We're all here for you," Nancy said, taking Michelle's hand briefly as the orderlies began to wheel her bed toward the elevator. "Your community," Robert added with a smile. As the doors to the operating room loomed ahead, Michelle felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever happened now, she was surrounded by love. Not the suffocating, dependent love she had known before, but a respectful, supporting love that recognized her as a whole person with her own dreams and dignity. The surgery was successful. Dr. Patel inserted a special coil through an artery in Michelle's leg, threading it all the way up to her brain, where it reinforced the weakened blood vessel. 3 days later, Michelle was sitting up in bed, already showing significant improvement in her left side mobility thanks to intensive therapy. The procedure was a complete success, Dr. Patel assured her during his rounds. "With continued therapy and proper medication, we expect you'll make a near-complete recovery." Robert had hardly left her side throughout the ordeal, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair and coordinating with the medical team in Santa Fe who would oversee her ongoing care once she was discharged. James had taken emergency leave from work, dividing his time between the hospital and caring for Kevin, who was confused and frightened by his grandmother's illness. Patricia had been surprisingly supportive, managing practical details like insurance forms and bringing home-cooked meals that were far better than hospital food. Nancy called daily and had already organized a schedule of friends in Santa Fe who would help with transportation to therapy appointments once Michelle returned. One afternoon, as Michelle was working with her physical therapist on exercises to improve her left-hand coordination, she had an unexpected visitor. Patricia arrived alone, looking unusually nervous and carrying a small gift bag. "James took Kevin to the Children's Museum," she explained. "I wanted to talk to you privately." Once the therapist left, Patricia sat beside Michelle's bed, fidgeting with the gift bag. "Michelle, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you months ago." Patricia revealed that the night they abandoned Michelle hadn't been a spontaneous act of cruelty. She had found notes from James's therapist about his deep-seated fear of becoming like his father, and she had deliberately provoked him, knowing it would trigger an explosion. I was jealous of your relationship with Kevin, threatened by James's deference to your opinions, Patricia confessed, tears streaming down her face. I thought if I could create a permanent rift between you two, I'd have more control. Michelle sat in stunned silence, trying to process this revelation. All these months, she had believed James's violence had been a momentary loss of control. To learn it had been facilitated by Patricia was almost too much to bear. "Does James know you're telling me this?" she finally asked. Patricia shook her head. "No, but when you had your stroke, when I thought we might lose you, I realized what a monster I'd become, how I'd used his deepest wounds against him, against you." From her bag, Patricia withdrew a small, weathered book, Michelle's diary, thought lost in the rainstorm the night she was abandoned. "James found it when we went back looking for you," Patricia explained. "I read it, all of it. I saw the sacrifices you made, the pain you endured. I realized how completely wrong I had been about you." As Patricia left, Michelle sat with her diary and the weight of this new knowledge, uncertain how it would affect her relationship with her son and his wife moving forward. But one thing was clear: the truth, however painful, was finally emerging. A week later, Michelle was discharged from the hospital. Robert had arranged for an ambulance service to transport her to Santa Fe, where she would continue her recovery in his home. James and Patricia had already relocated to their summer rental nearby, ready to provide additional support as needed. The journey was exhausting, but Michelle's spirits lifted as the familiar landscape of New Mexico came into view. Robert's adobe house, with its walled garden and mountain views, felt like a sanctuary after the clinical environment of the hospital. "Welcome home," Robert said softly as he helped her from the wheelchair into the comfortable armchair by the window in what would be her room during recovery. The ground floor guest room had been transformed with thoughtful touches, her favorite books on the nightstand, a small easel by the window, the turquoise blanket from her apartment draped over the foot of the bed. A vase of fresh sunflowers brightened the dresser. "It's perfect," Michelle whispered, overcome with emotion. The next few weeks established a new rhythm. Mornings were devoted to therapy, physical, occupational, and speech, though the latter was hardly needed as Michelle's verbal abilities had remained largely intact. Afternoons were for rest and gentle activities, like the simplified watercolor exercises Robert had designed for her recovering coordination. James visited daily, often bringing Kevin, who was fascinated by his grandmother's robot claw, the adaptive tool she used to grasp objects when her left hand wouldn't cooperate. Patricia came less frequently but called regularly, her manner more subdued than before her confession. One evening, about a month after returning to Santa Fe, Michelle sat with Robert on the patio, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "I've been thinking about what Patricia told me," Michelle said softly, "about manipulating James that night." Robert nodded. He was one of the few people Michelle had confided in about Patricia's revelation. "I haven't told James," Michelle continued. "I'm not sure if I should." "That's a difficult decision," Robert acknowledged. "What does your heart tell you?" Michelle considered the question. "James has been working so hard in therapy, confronting his father's legacy of violence, rebuilding our relationship, learning how Patricia used his deepest wounds against him might destroy him, or at least their marriage. And is preserving their marriage worth the cost of keeping this truth from him?" "I don't know," Michelle admitted. "What would you do?" Robert was silent for a moment. "I believe truth is ultimately healing, even when it's painful, but timing matters. James is still fragile, still working through his guilt about that night. Perhaps this is a truth that can wait until he's stronger." Michelle nodded, grateful for Robert's wisdom. "I think you're right. For now, I'll focus on healing, both physically and emotionally. The rest will come in its own time. As summer progressed, Michelle's recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. By August, she was walking independently with only occasional use of a cane, and her left hand, while not as dexterous as before, could manage most daily tasks and even hold a paintbrush for short periods. James and his family had integrated surprisingly well into Santa Fe life. Kevin attended a day camp where he thrived in the outdoor activities. James had connected with the local university's engineering department, and even Patricia seemed to be finding her place, volunteering at an art therapy program for children. One Saturday, they gathered for a picnic in the small park near Robert's house. As Michelle watched Kevin playing frisbee with Robert, she realized how much her life had transformed in the span of a year. From the lonely widow in a cramped apartment to a stroke survivor surrounded by a loving, if complicated, family and community. James sat beside her on the picnic blanket, following her gaze to where Robert was patiently showing Kevin how to adjust his throw. "He's good with Kevin," James observed. "He is," Michelle agreed. "He was a teacher for 30 years. He has a natural way with children. And with you," James added softly. "He loves you, Mom. Anyone can see that." Michelle smiled. "Yes, he does. And I love him too, which is something I never expected at my age." "I'm happy for you," James said, and Michelle could hear the sincerity in his voice. "After everything Dad put you through, after everything He trailed off, still finding it difficult to directly reference that night. "James," Michelle said gently, taking his hand, "we've both made mistakes. We've both hurt each other. But look at us now. We're finding our way to something new and better." James nodded, blinking back tears. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, about the drinking, the violence. In therapy, I'm starting to understand how much it shaped me, how I internalized his anger without even realizing it." "Your father wasn't always that way," Michelle said softly. "The man I married was kind, gentle. The factory accident changed him. The pain, the pills, then the drinking. He lost himself, James, but that doesn't excuse what he did to us or what you did to me." "No, it doesn't," James agreed, his voice steady despite the tears now falling freely. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Michelle squeezed his hand. "I don't want your guilt, James. I want your healing. I want you to break this cycle so Kevin never has to carry these wounds." Later that evening, after James and his family had gone, Michelle sat with Robert in his, now their, living room. The events of the day had left her thoughtful, reflective. "I think I'm ready to tell James about Patricia's confession," she said suddenly. "He's stronger now, more aware of his own patterns. He deserves to know the truth, even if it's painful." Robert nodded. "If you're sure, I'll support whatever decision you make. Will you be there when I tell him? I think I'll need your strength." "Of course," Robert promised. "Whenever you're ready." The opportunity came sooner than expected. The next day, James arrived alone, explaining that Patricia had taken Kevin to a children's museum in Albuquerque. "She's been acting strangely lately," he confided as Michelle poured coffee in the kitchen. "Distant, almost guilty. I'm worried she's unhappy here in Santa Fe." Michelle exchanged a glance with Robert, who nodded slightly. It was time. "James, there's something I need to tell you," Michelle began, leading him to the living room. "Something Patricia shared with me in the hospital." Slowly, carefully, Michelle explained what Patricia had confessed, how she had found his therapy notes, how she had deliberately triggered his deepest fears and insecurities, how she had manipulated the situation to create a rift between mother and son. James listened in stunned silence, his face draining of color. When Michelle finished, he sat motionless, staring at his hands. "This explains so much," he finally whispered. Her recent behavior, her insistence on coming to Santa Fe, her volunteer work with children. She's been trying to make amends without actually confessing. I think she's genuinely remorseful, Michelle said gently. But yes, she's been carrying this guilt all these months. James looked up, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're stronger now, Michelle replied honestly. Because you've been doing the hard work of therapy and self-reflection. And because relationships built on lies, even well-intentioned ones, can never truly heal. James nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty, Mom. I need time to process this, to figure out what it means for me, for Patricia, for our marriage. Take all the time you need, Michelle said, and remember, whatever you decide, you're not alone. You have support, here, with me and Robert, and with your therapist. After James left, visibly shaken but remarkably composed, Michelle felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The truth was out now, for better or worse. The rest was up to James. You did the right thing, Robert assured her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Truth is the foundation of healing, even when it hurts. In the days that followed, James kept his distance, needing space to process the revelation about Patricia's manipulation. He called briefly to let Michelle know he was okay, but needed time. Patricia had moved out temporarily, staying in a hotel while they decided how to move forward. Michelle respected their need for privacy during this crisis, focusing instead on her continued recovery and her deepening relationship with Robert. The house they now shared had become a true home, filled with art, music, and the quiet companionship of two people who had found each other later in life. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching the stars emerge, Robert took Michelle's hand. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "About us, about the future." Michelle turned to face him, noting the nervous energy in his usually calm demeanor. "What is it?" "I know we've talked about keeping things simple at our age. No legal complications, just enjoying whatever time we have together," Robert began. "And I respect that. But I want you to know that if you ever change your mind, if you ever want something more formal," he trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. "Robert Thompson," Michelle said, unable to suppress a smile. "Are you proposing to me?" He chuckled, the tension breaking. "Not exactly, or at least not pressuring you. Just letting you know the option is there, if and when you might want it." Michelle leaned forward and kissed him softly. "Thank you. For now, this, just being together, is everything I need. But it's nice to know the door is open." Michelle's 70th birthday dawned clear and bright in Santa Fe, 6 months after her surgery. She stood on the small patio of Robert's adobe house, now their adobe house, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and pink. So much had changed in the past year. A different woman had celebrated her 69th birthday in a cramped apartment, living a life dictated by others' expectations. Now, at 70, Michelle Young stood tall, with the assistance of a decorative cane on days when her balance felt precarious, mistress of her own destiny. The aftermath of her revelation to James had been difficult but ultimately healing. After much soul-searching and intensive couples therapy, James and Patricia had decided to separate, though they remained committed to co-parenting Kevin with minimal conflict. James had returned to their home city but visited Santa Fe regularly, bringing Kevin for weekend stays that filled the house with childish laughter and energy. Patricia, surprisingly, had remained in Santa Fe, finding unexpected purpose in her volunteer work with the art therapy program. She and Michelle had established a cautious but respectful relationship, bound by their mutual love for Kevin and their shared commitment to breaking cycles of hurt. Robert had planned a small birthday celebration at Michelle's favorite restaurant that evening. As she dressed for the day, Michelle studied her reflection in the mirror. The stroke had left subtle marks, a slight droop to her left eye when she was tired, the occasional word that eluded her, the careful way she now had to navigate stairs. But it had also given gifts, a deeper appreciation for small pleasures, a newfound patience with herself and others, a certainty about what truly mattered. The birthday dinner was everything Michelle could have wished for, intimate, joyful, surrounded by the community she had built in her new life. Nancy and Carol were there, along with friends from the senior center painting group. James had flown in for the occasion, bringing a handmade card from Kevin, who was spending the weekend with Patricia's sister. After dessert was served, Robert stood and tapped his glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast to Michelle, who has taught us all something about resilience, about grace, and about the art of reinvention." "To Michelle," the group chorused, raising their glasses. James stood next. "Mom, a year ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I hurt the person who had always been there for me, who had sacrificed everything for my happiness. But from that terrible night came something unexpected, a chance for both of us to grow, to heal old wounds, to become better versions of ourselves." Michelle felt tears gathering as her son continued. "You showed me what true strength looks like," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not the false strength of anger or control, but the quiet strength of knowing who you are and standing firm in that knowledge." After the party, Robert presented Michelle with his gift, a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a plum blossom with the word rebirth engraved on the back. "It's perfect," Michelle whispered as he fastened it around her neck. "When Claire died, I thought that chapter of my life was over forever," Robert said softly. "I never imagined I would find love again, especially not with someone as extraordinary as you." The next morning, Michelle rose early, drawn to her small art studio behind the house. The room was filled with light, illuminating the painting on her easel, a series of sunflowers, their bright faces turned toward the sun. Her Stormy Night series had sold surprisingly well at a local gallery, the raw emotion of those early works speaking to viewers in unexpected ways. But now she preferred to paint light, sunrises, sunflowers, the golden glow of late afternoon on adobe walls. As she mixed colors on her palette, Michelle reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain of being abandoned on that rainy highway had been excruciating, but it had also been the catalyst for her transformation. Without that moment of deepest darkness, she might never have discovered her own strength, her artistic talent, her capacity for independent joy. She was dabbing yellow paint onto the canvas when a knock at the studio door interrupted her concentration. James stood there, looking slightly hesitant. "Morning, Mom. Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Michelle smiled, setting down her brush. "Come in. I was just working on a new piece." James entered, admiring the sunflower painting. "It's beautiful. You've really developed your own style." "Robert says I'm finding my voice as an artist," Michelle said, pleased by the recognition. "What brings you by so early?" James pulled an envelope from his pocket. "I have one more birthday gift for you. I wasn't sure whether to give it to you, but after talking with my therapist, I think it's important." Michelle opened the envelope to find a folded sheet of yellowed paper, a child's essay in familiar handwriting. The title at the top read, "My Mom," by James Young, age 10. "I found this in one of the boxes Patricia packed up from your apartment," James explained. "It won the school contest that year, do you remember?" Michelle nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "You were so proud. You ran all the way home to show me the ribbon." She began to read the simple, heartfelt words written by her son over 30 years ago. "My mom is the best mom in the world. She wakes up very early to make me breakfast. When I'm asleep, she is still mending my clothes. Once I had a high fever and my mom carried me to the hospital. She fell down on the way, but she held me tight so I wouldn't get hurt. Tears blurred Michelle's vision as she continued reading. My mom's hands are rough, but they feel so gentle. My mom says you should be like bamboo, straight on the outside but hollow on the inside, upright and humble. When I grow up, I will make sure my mom has a good life so she never has to work so hard again. Michelle looked up at her son, who was watching her with tears in his own eyes. I failed you, Mom, he said quietly. I promised to give you a good life, but instead He couldn't finish. Michelle set the essay aside and took his hands. James, listen to me. You were 10 years old when you wrote this. You couldn't have known how complicated life would become. Harold's drinking, your own struggles, the pressures of raising Kevin. We all do the best we can with what we have. But I broke my promise. No, Michelle said firmly. Look around you. I have a good life now. A beautiful home, a loving partner, meaningful work, and a son who, despite his mistakes, has found the courage to face his demons and become a better man. In a way, your promise has been fulfilled, just not in the way that 10-year-old boy imagined. James nodded slowly, accepting her perspective. I'm going to keep working on myself, Mom. For Kevin's sake, for my own, and for our relationship. I know you will, Michelle said with confidence. And I'm going to keep painting, keep learning, keep growing. We're both works in progress, James. The canvas is never really finished. That afternoon, Michelle sat in the garden with Robert, watching the sunlight dapple through the leaves of the old cottonwood tree. In the distance, the mountains stood firm against the horizon, eternal witnesses to the human dramas played out beneath them. Happy? Robert asked simply, his hand finding hers. Very, Michelle replied. A year ago, I never could have imagined this life. It's as if I had to lose everything to find what was truly important. The Japanese have a concept called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, Robert said. The idea is that the piece becomes more beautiful for having been broken, the golden repairs highlighting rather than hiding the damage. Michelle considered this, thinking of her own breaks and repairs, the abandonment, the stroke, the painful truths about Patricia's manipulation. Each break had been mended not with shame or concealment, but with the gold of newfound strength, deeper understanding, authentic connection. I like that, she said softly. We're all kintsugi art, aren't we? More beautiful for our breaks, if we have the courage to repair them honestly. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Michelle felt a profound sense of peace. At 70, she had finally become the woman she was meant to be. Not just someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother, but fully and completely herself. The journey had been unexpected and often painful, but the destination was worth every step. The plum blossom pendant rested against her heart, a reminder that from the coldest winters come the most beautiful blooms. She had weathered her storm and emerged transformed, ready to embrace whatever adventures the coming years might bring. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and don't forget to share this story with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late for a fresh start. If you enjoyed Rebirth at Sunset, check out these 2 other stories that are channel favorites. The Inheritance She Never Expected, and When My Daughter-in-Law Replaced Me with a Nanny.